If you've been following this channel, you already know we've gone through the entire F series, the B series, the A series, and even the complete MiG series. Every single number, no skipping. Today, we do it again. But this time, we're going deep into Russia. We're talking about one of the most legendary aircraft families ever built, the Sukhoi Su series. From Su-1 all the way to the latest Su-75, we are covering every number. Even the ones that never flew, even the ones nobody talks about. So buckle up, this is going to be a big one. Let's go. We don't usually ask you to subscribe at the beginning of our videos, but many of you still aren't subscribed. We would really appreciate it if you subscribed, as it motivates us to create more videos for you. Also, let us know which series you'd like to see next. Now, let's get back to the video. Before we start, who is Sukhoi? Pavel Sukhoi was a Soviet aircraft designer. He started his own design bureau, the Sukhoi OKB, and over the decades, it became one of the most powerful names in military aviation history. The Sukhoi company is based in Russia and has built fighters, bombers, attack jets, aerobatic planes, and even passenger aircraft. And just like the MiG series, not every number was used the same way. Some Su numbers were used twice, once for a prototype in the 1940s, and again for a completely different production aircraft in the 1950s or later. We'll point that out as we go. All right, let's start from the very beginning.
Su-1, the high-altitude fighter prototype. The Su-1, also known as the I-330, was Sukhoi's very first aircraft to carry the Su name. It was designed as a high-altitude fighter, meaning it was built to fly extremely high and intercept enemy aircraft at altitude. It used a Klimov M105P engine with twin turbochargers. That was the special part. Those turbochargers were supposed to give it power even in the thin air up high. It could reach speeds of around 400 miles per hour and climb to 41,000 feet. But there was a big problem. Those turbochargers kept failing. They were unreliable. Only one prototype was ever built. It never went into production. And sadly, it was later destroyed in a German bombing raid when the war started. Su-2. Now we get to the first Sukhoi aircraft that actually went to war. The Su-2 was a reconnaissance aircraft and light bomber, and it flew for the Soviet Air Forces during World War II. It had a crew of two, a pilot and a gunner, and it carried bombs under the wings and fuselage. Over 910 were built, which makes it the first mass-produced Sukhoi aircraft. It first flew in 1937 and entered service in 1939. It saw action when Germany invaded the Soviet Union in 1941. It wasn't a perfect aircraft. It was slow compared to German fighters, but it served its role as a tactical bomber and was used until 1944. Su-3. The Su-3 was basically an upgraded version of the Su-1, the same high-altitude fighter concept, but with improved wings that had less surface area for better speed. Again, only one prototype was built. The turbocharger problems from the Su-1 were still not fully solved, and the program was canceled. The Su-3 never saw combat. Su-4. The Su-4 was a production derivative of the Su-2 with improvements, not just a simple one-off modification, fitted with Shvetsov M82 radial engine. It was a limited production aircraft to evaluate improved performance. It entered limited production, but was built in small numbers because the Su-2 line was already being phased out in favor of more capable aircraft like the IL-2. Su-5. This one is interesting. The Su-5, also known as the I-107, was a mixed-power aircraft, meaning it used both a traditional piston engine and motor jet VRDK-type system. The idea was to use the motor jet to give it an extra burst of speed when needed. It flew in 1945, just as World War II was ending. It was a fascinating experiment, but mixed-power propulsion didn't become the future. Jet engines were coming, and they would change everything. Only one prototype was built. Su-6. Now this one is a beast. The Su-6 was a heavy ground attack aircraft designed to destroy enemy tanks, vehicles, and troops on the battlefield. It flew in 1942 and was heavily armored to survive enemy fire from the ground. It was actually a strong design. Some say it was better than the famous IL-2 Sturmovik in certain ways, but the Soviet Air Forces were already fully committed to the IL-2 production line, and switching would have disrupted the war effort. So the Su-6 was rejected for production, not because it was bad, but because of timing. Su-7, 1944 version, The first one, yes, there are two. Now, here's where it gets a little confusing. The first Su-7 from 1944 was a mixed-power high-altitude interceptor, another experiment combining a piston engine with a motor jet VRDK type auxiliary propulsion system. It was part of the same wave of experimental ideas as the Su-5. It was a prototype. It did not go into production. But, and this is important, the Su-7 designation was used again later for a completely different and very famous supersonic fighter bomber introduced in the late 1950s. Su-8. The Su-8 was internally known as Project B or DDB-SH. It was a twin-engine, two-seat, heavily armored ground attack aircraft built during the German-Soviet War. Two prototypes were completed with first flight in 1944. It was a serious large aircraft for its role, but it was primarily limited by engine availability and changing production priorities, preventing mass production. Su-9, the first jet fighter. After World War II, everything changed. Jet engines arrived and Sukhoi jumped right in. The first Su-9 from 1946 was a jet-powered fighter, one of the first Sukhoi jets ever built. It was an experimental jet fighter that closely resembled the German Messerschmitt Me 262, which makes sense because it was developed using captured German jet technology after the war. It first flew in 1946. A small number of prototypes were built. A two-seat trainer version, the Su-9 UT, was planned but never built. This aircraft represented Sukhoi's very first step into the jet age, years before their later numbering system produced more famous Soviet jets. Su-10. The Su-10 was ambitious. It was a four-engine jet bomber prototype designed in 1946, right at the dawn of the jet age. Think about that. 4 jet engines in 1946. That was incredibly advanced for the time. It never flew as a complete aircraft. The project was canceled before full production, but it showed Sukhoi was already thinking big. Su-11. The first Su-11 was a development of the Su-9, 1946, a twin-engine prototype jet fighter. It had a shape that actually resembled the German Messerschmitt Me 262. It flew in 1946, but again, it didn't make it to production. Just like Su-9, the Su-11 name was reused again in the 1960s for a completely different interceptor aircraft. We'll cover that too. Su-12. The Su-12 was internally Project RK. It was a twin-engine, twin-boom reconnaissance and artillery spotting aircraft with a distinctive greenhouse glazed nose for observation. It flew in 1947. A single prototype was completed and tested in the late 1940s. There were even plans to produce it in Czechoslovakia, though this never came to fruition. Su-13. The Su-13, internally Project KD, was a planned night fighter version of the Su-9 jet fighter, re-engined with Klimov RD 500 engines, Soviet copies of the British Rolls-Royce Derwent turbojet. None were actually built. It remained a paper project. Su-14. The Su-14, internally Project N, was a jet-powered attack aircraft design with a distinctive V-tail. It was never built. Su-15, again, 2 aircraft with the same number. The first Su-15 from 1949 was a jet-powered fighter interceptor. Top speed was 641 miles per hour. It flew in 1949 and showed some promise, but it was canceled before entering service. The Su-15 name came back in the 1960s for one of the most infamous interceptors in Soviet history, an aircraft we absolutely will talk about. Su-16. Su-16 is another number with no confirmed, publicly documented aircraft, possibly canceled at an early design phase. Su-17. The first Su-17, internally Project R, was a prototype jet fighter that never reached production. One was built in 1949. The aircraft had a 50-degree swept wing fitted with air brakes and boosted controls. This aircraft closes out the first Sukhoi numbering system. After Su-17, the original bureau's fortunes changed. Sukhoi fell out of political favor, and the design bureau was shut down for several years. When Sukhoi resumed major development work in the early 1950s, it effectively began a new design sequence that is often treated as a second system, though it was not an officially reset numbering scheme in formal documentation. So here's the fact which most people don't know about the Su. In 1949, the Sukhoi Design Bureau was closed by the Soviet authorities after its early jet fighter projects failed to reach production and lagged behind competing designs. With limited resources and strong pressure during the early Cold War to rapidly field operational aircraft, the government consolidated aviation development into a smaller number of more successful design bureaus, leading to Sukhoi's temporary shutdown. As a result, the original Sukhoi numbering system ended with the Su-17 experimental prototype. After Stalin's death and a policy shift in 1953, the Bureau was re-established. With its revival, Sukhoi did not continue the old numbering sequence and instead started a new design era beginning with the Su-7, marking the start of the modern Sukhoi lineage. Su-7. The Su-7 was the first major aircraft of Sukhoi's second era. Its NATO reporting name was Fitter. The first prototype, called S-1, first flew on September 7, 1955. It used the new Lyulka AL-7 turbojet engine. It was a swept-wing frontline fighter and fighter bomber. Top speed was around 2,150 kilometers per hour. Range was about 1,650 kilometers. The service ceiling was around 57,700 feet. Engine reliability was a serious early problem. Only 132 were produced in the first few years between 1957 and 1960 because of it. Once those issues were resolved, the Su-7 became the primary Soviet fighter bomber for years, doubling as a limited strike aircraft. It was exported widely and saw combat in several Middle Eastern conflicts, including the 1967 and 1973 Arab-Israeli Wars. Su-9. This Su-9 is the famous one, a single-engine, all-weather, missile-armed interceptor. Its NATO reporting name was Fishpot. It first flew as the T-405 prototype in 1956 and entered service in 1959. It used a 53-degree delta wing and the same Lyulka AL-7F turbojet found in the Su-7. Top speed was Mach 1.8 at altitude. The service ceiling was 66,000 feet. Around 1,150 were built. It carried no cannon at all. Only 4 K-5 beam-riding air-to-air missiles, which were considered fairly weak weapons even by the standards of the time. The Su-9 became notable in 1960 for being scrambled unsuccessfully to intercept France's Gary Powers' U-2 spy plane over Soviet territory. A 2-seat trainer version, the Su-9U, was nicknamed Maiden by NATO. It was eventually succeeded by the improved Su-11 and later the much more capable Su-15. Su-11. The second Su-11 was an upgraded version of the Su-9, with a slightly lengthened fuselage and improved radar and missile systems. NATO called it Fishpot C. It entered service around 1964. Top speed reached over Mach 2 in some configurations. Only about 108 were built. Su-15. This is the legendary Su-15, a twin-engine supersonic interceptor. NATO called it Flagon. The prototype first flew on May 30th, 1962, and it formally entered Soviet service in 1965, eventually replacing the Su-9 and Su-11 family. Engines were two Tumansky R-11 F2S 300 turbojets on early models, later upgraded. Top speed reached Mach 2.1, with operational speeds closer to 2,230 kilometers per hour at altitude. Service ceiling was around 18,100 meters. Primary armament was the R-98 air-to-air missile, carried on outer wing pylons, supplemented later by R-60 short-range missiles. About 1,290 were built in total between 1965 and 1979. The Su-15 is most infamous for its role in 2 tragic incidents. On September 1, 1983, a Soviet Su-15 shot down Korean Airlines Flight 007, a civilian passenger Boeing 747, killing all 269 people on board. The Soviet pilot identified it as a spy plane. It was not. It had drifted off course into Soviet airspace. The incident caused a massive international crisis and damaged Soviet-American relations severely. It remained the backbone of Soviet home defense interceptor forces well into the 1980s, before being phased out in favor of the MiG-31. Su-17. The Su-17 was a major redevelopment of the original Su-7, this time featuring a variable sweep wing. The pilot could change the wing angle in flight, just like on the MiG-23. NATO still called this Fitter family. It first flew in the 1966 and entered service in 1971. The final and most advanced version, the Su-17M4, used the Lyulka AL-21F3 engine, reached around 1,860 kilometers per hour, or Mach 1.7, and carried two 30mm NR-30 cannons, plus a wide range of bombs, rockets, and missiles on 12 hardpoints. Around 2,867 were built across the whole fitter family. Export versions were designated Su-20 and Su-22, depending on the customer and equipment fit. It was used by more than 20 countries and saw extensive combat, including extended service with Peru, Syria, and several African nations. These numbers don't correspond to confirmed Sukhoi production aircraft. Su-24. The Su-24 was a major leap for Sukhoi, a dedicated swing-wing strike aircraft internally nicknamed Chemodan, meaning suitcase, though that nickname was used informally by pilots rather than officially by Sukhoi. NATO called it Fencer. It entered service in 1974. It carried a 6-barrel, 23mm GS 623 cannon, or a 30mm version on later models, along with up to 8,000 kilograms of bombs, rockets, and missiles across 8 hardpoints. Top speed was around Mach 2.18. Service ceiling was about 17,500 meters. Around 1,400 were built. It was designed for low-level strike missions deep into enemy territory and remained in Russian service for decades, including combat use in Syria. It was eventually intended to be replaced by the Su-34. Su-25. The Su-25 took a completely different approach. Close air support, similar in concept to the American A-10 Warthog. NATO called it Frogfoot. It first flew on February 22, 1975, and entered service in 1981. It used two Tumansky R195 turbojet engines. Top speed was about 975 kilometers per hour, much slower than Sukhoi's fighters by design, since it needed to fly low and slow over the battlefield. It carried one 30mm GS-32 cannon with 250 rounds, plus up to 10 or 11 hardpoints of rockets, bombs, and guided missiles. Around 1,024 to 1,320 were built. The cockpit was protected by titanium armor to survive ground fire. It first saw combat in the Soviet-Afghan War and has remained in active combat use ever since, including extensively in Syria and in the war in Ukraine. A dedicated tank killer variant, the Su-25T, and an improved Su-25SM upgrade kept the aircraft relevant decades after its original design. Su-26. The Su-26 stepped away from combat aircraft entirely. The Su-26 is not a fighter. It's not a bomber. It's an aerobatic aircraft designed for air shows and aerobatic competitions. It was developed in the early to mid-1980s and first flew in 1984. It was designed specifically for unlimited aerobatic competition with a very high power-to-weight ratio and exceptional roll rate, making it highly competitive in World Aerobatics Championships. It has nothing to do with Sukhoi's military lineage in terms of mission, but it carries the family name because it came from the same design bureau. Su-27. The Su-27 is one of the most important fighters of the entire Cold War. NATO called it flanker. Development began in the 1970s, specifically to counter the American F-15 Eagle. The first prototype flew on May 20th, 1977, and it formally entered service around 1984 to 1985. It is powered by two Lyulka, later Saturn, AL-31F turbofan engines, each producing around 16,900 pounds of thrust dry and over 27,500 pounds with afterburner. Top speed reaches Mach 2.35, about 2,500 kilometers per hour. Service ceiling is around 18,000 to 19,000 meters, depending on variant and source. Range is roughly 3,530 kilometers, giving it long-range interception capability. Armament includes one 30mm GSH-31 cannon plus up to 10 hardpoints carrying R-27 and R-73 air-to-air missiles. The Su-27 introduced the Soviet Union's first operational digital fly-by-wire flight control system in later production standards, enabling extreme maneuverability. It became famous for high-alpha demonstrations, such as the Cobra maneuver, where the aircraft pitches to very high angles of attack while maintaining forward motion briefly. It was substantially larger than the MiG-29, emphasizing range and endurance over for point defense agility, and it formed the basis for a major aircraft family, including the Su-30, Su-33, Su-34, and Su-35. China later produced a licensed derivative known as the J-11. Su-28. The Su-28 is essentially the same aircraft as the Su-25UB. The UB stands for Uchebno Boyevoi, which means training combat, a dedicated two-seat trainer version of the Frogfoot, with reduced equipment and armament removed for training purposes. It first flew in 1987. It does not represent a separate combat type, just a specialized training designation. Su-29. The Su-29 is the two-seat version of the Su-26 aerobatic aircraft. It's used for aerobatic training and competitions. If you ever want to learn aerobatics at a professional level, this is one of the aircraft you'd fly. Su-30. The Su-30 began life internally as the Su-27 Pu, a heavy two-seat interceptor derived from the Su-27 UB trainer. It was officially renamed Su-30 by the Russian Defense Ministry in 1996. NATO calls it Flanker C. It uses two Saturn AL-31FL or FP turbofan engines, each producing around 16,700 pounds of thrust dry and 27,560 pounds with afterburner. Top speed is comparable to the Su-27, around Mach 2. It carries one 30mm G-ish 31 cannon, plus up to 12 hardpoints of air-to-air and air-to-ground weapons. Around 630 to 700 have been built across all variants. The Su-30 split into two major export branches, the Su-30 MKK and Su-30 MK2, built for China and other customers. The Russian-specific version, the Su-30SM, entered service in 2018 and remains one of the most widely exported Sukhoi fighters in the world today, used by more than a dozen countries. Su-31. The Su-31 is another aerobatic aircraft developed from the Su-26 and Su-29 lineage, continuing Sukhoi's small but successful line of competition sport planes. Su-32. The Su-32 designation, also referred to by the nickname Morskoi Zmei, Sea Serpent, was an export marketing name closely linked to what eventually became the Su-34 strike aircraft. The Su-34 fullback is a Russian strike fighter that first flew in 1990 and entered service in 2014. It is also sometimes called the Su-32 in export versions. It is powered by two Saturn AL-31 FM1 turbofan engines. Its top speed is around Mach 1.8 depending on load and altitude, and its service ceiling is approximately 14,000 to 15,000 meters. It is a twin-seat, twin-engine aircraft designed mainly for bombing and long-range attack missions, and its primary role is to replace the older Su-24 strike aircraft. The pilot and navigator sit side by side in a wide armored cockpit, which improves coordination during long-duration missions and reduces fatigue. Armament includes an internal 30mm GSH 31 cannon, along with up to 12 external hardpoints capable of carrying a wide range of weapons, including precision-guided bombs, cruise missiles, anti-ship missiles, and air-to-air missiles for self-defense. Because it is designed for long-range operations, the Su-34 also includes limited crew comfort features such as a rest area and a small onboard toilet, which is highly unusual for a combat aircraft. Today, the Su-34 remains one of Russia's primary strike aircraft and has been used extensively in combat operations in Syria and Ukraine. Su-33. The Su-33, originally known as the Su-27K, is the carrier-based version of the Su-27 and carries the NATO reporting name Flanker D. It is designed to operate from Russia's aircraft carrier, the Admiral Kuznetsov. It is powered by two Saturn AL-31F turbofan engines, which give it strong thrust for both takeoff from a ski jump ramp and high-speed flight. The aircraft can reach a top speed of about Mach 2.1 and has a service ceiling of around 17,000 meters. The Su-33 is equipped with folding wings so it can fit inside the carrier's hangar, along with reinforced landing gear to withstand hard deck landings and a tailhook to stop on the short runway of the ship. In terms of weapons, it can carry a range of air-to-air missiles, rockets, and bombs, mainly focusing on air defense and fleet protection rather than strike missions. It first flew as the Su-27K prototype in 1987 and officially entered service in 1998. For takeoff, it uses a ski jump ramp instead of a catapult system, unlike American carriers. Only a small number were built because Russia operates just one main aircraft carrier, and that ship has experienced long maintenance periods and limited deployment. Su-35. The Su-35 started as the Su-27M in the 1980s, an upgrade program for the original Su-27 with better avionics, more range, and a more powerful engine. NATO calls the modern version Flanker E. The current production model, the Su-35S, uses two Saturn AL-41F1S engines. It features full-thrust vectoring nozzles. Top speed is about Mach 2.25. It carries one 30mm G-30 cannon plus up to 14 hardpoints. It represents the most advanced non-stealth version of the flanker lineage, intended to serve as a bridge until the fifth generation Su-57 became available in sufficient numbers. Su-36. There is no Su-36 aircraft. Su-37. The Su-37 was a single technology demonstrator developed from the Su-27M airframe. It was designed to test advanced thrust vectoring engines which allow the aircraft to direct engine thrust for extreme maneuverability. NATO gave it the reporting name Flanker F, but it became widely known by the nickname Terminator. It first flew in April 1996 and was used mainly for testing and airshow demonstrations. The aircraft became famous for showing highly advanced aerobatic maneuvers, including full post-stall control and tight 360-degree rotations in the air. The Su-37 was powered by two Saturn AL-31 turbofan engines fitted with thrust vectoring nozzles, giving it exceptional agility at low speeds and high angles of attack. It could reach speeds of around Mach 2.35 and had a service ceiling of about 18,000 meters. It was also capable of carrying air-to-air missiles and other standard Su-27 family weapons, but its main purpose was technology testing rather than combat deployment. The program ended after the only prototype crashed in December 2002 during high-stress maneuvering due to structural failure. Despite this, the project was important because many of its technologies were later integrated into aircraft like the Su-35 and Su-30 MKI. Su-38. The Su-38 is a light agricultural aircraft designed for crop dusting and aerial application of chemicals over farmland, built as a prototype in 2001. It's a single-engine, propeller-driven aircraft, completely different from everything else on this list. It stands out as one of the very few entirely civilian designs to receive an Su number outside of the aerobatic line. Su-39. The Su-39 is the export designation for the Su-25TM, a dedicated tank-busting variant of the Frogfoot family, fitted with improved targeting systems and able to carry the Vickers laser-guided anti-tank missile. These numbers, Su-40 through Su-46, don't correspond to confirmed Sukhoi production or widely known prototype aircraft. Su-47. The Su-47, nicknamed Berkut, meaning Golden Eagle, is one of the most visually unusual aircraft Sukhoi ever built. NATO called it Firkin. It was originally designated S-32 and later S-37 during development, before being renamed Su-47 in 2002. Its defining feature was a forward-swept wing, similar in concept to the American Grumman X-29. Intended to dramatically improve low-speed maneuverability and high angle of attack performance. It first flew on September 25th, 1997. Only one was ever built. The Su-47 was powered by two D-30F6 engines. Top speed is generally estimated around Mach 1.6 to 1.8. Forward-swept wings offered excellent maneuverability and stall resistance at high angles of attack. but structural issues, especially aeroelastic divergence and material limitations, made them impractical for high-speed flight compared to conventional swept wings. Even so, the Su-47 served as a vital technology demonstrator for composite materials, internal weapons bays, and aerodynamic concepts that were later refined into programs like the Su-57. Again, these numbers in the sequence don't correspond to confirmed public Sukhoi aircraft. Su-57. The Su-57 is Russia's first and only fifth-generation stealth fighter currently in service. NATO calls it Felon. Internally, during development, it was called the T-50, part of the PA-KFA program that began in 1999. The prototype made its first flight on January 29, 2010. It is powered by two Saturn AL-41F1 afterburning turbofan engines, each producing around 88.3 kilonewtons of dry thrust and 142 kilonewtons with afterburner over 28 tons of combined thrust. Top speed is about Mach 2, service ceiling is around 20,000 meters, maximum takeoff weight is about 35,000 kilograms. It has 12 hardpoints in total, 6 of them internal to preserve its stealth shape, and carries an internal 30mm GSH-31 cannon, plus a wide range of missiles, including the long-range R-37M and the active radar-guided R-77M. It officially entered service with Russian forces in December 2020, though deliveries have been slow and limited in number compared to original Soviet-era ambitions for this program. It has reportedly seen limited combat use during the war in Ukraine. A more powerful future engine, sometimes called Izdeliye 30 or Product 177, is intended to give the aircraft true full supercruise performance and is currently in flight testing. These numbers between Su-57 and Su-70 include various designations that are either internal project codes not publicly disclosed or canceled programs from Russia's post-Cold War era. Su-70. The Su-70 Okhotnik, also known as Hunter, is a sixth-generation stealth unmanned combat aerial vehicle. UCAV. Sixth generation is not an official designation and is speculative. It first flew in 2019. It is a large, heavy drone designed for strike missions, meaning it can attack ground targets without a pilot on board. The aircraft uses a flying wing design, which helps reduce radar visibility and makes it harder to detect. The Sukhoi S-70 Okhotnik Hunter B is powered by a single Saturn AL-41F turbofan engine. This is related to the engine family used on the Su-35S and early Su-57 fighters. The Su-70 is powered by a jet engine and is believed to reach high subsonic speeds, around 1,000 kilometers per hour, with a service ceiling of roughly 18,000 meters. Estimates vary due to limited public data. It is designed to carry weapons internally, including guided bombs and missiles, to maintain its stealth profile. One of its key roles is to operate alongside manned fighters like the Su-57, acting as a loyal wingman. It can scout targets, perform reconnaissance, and carry out strikes while the pilot in the main aircraft stays at a safer distance. Overall, the Su-70 represents a shift toward future warfare, where unmanned stealth aircraft work together with human pilots to increase combat effectiveness and reduce risk. These numbers don't correspond to confirmed publicly known Sukhoi aircraft. Su-75, the Su-75 Checkmate, is a Russian single-engine stealth fighter that was officially revealed in 2021 as a lightweight fifth-generation aircraft concept. It is designed as a lower-cost alternative to heavier stealth fighters like the Su-57, aimed mainly at export customers. The aircraft is a single-seat jet with internal weapon bays to maintain stealth and reduce radar detection. It is expected to be powered by a single advanced turbofan engine, likely a variant of the Saturn AL-41 or a next-generation derivative. This is intended to give supersonic capability with a projected top speed of around Mach 1.8 to Mach 2.0. The estimated service ceiling is around 16,000 to 17,000 meters. In terms of weapons, the Su-75 is designed to carry air-to-air missiles for air combat, along with precision-guided bombs and air-to-surface missiles for strike missions. Its payload is expected to be around 4 to 7 tons. The aircraft is built with stealth shaping, including a single-engine layout, internal weapons bay, and radar-absorbing materials to reduce its radar cross-section. It is also planned to include modern avionics, sensor fusion, and networked combat capability to work alongside other Russian aircraft and drones. Overall, the Su-75 Checkmate is a proposed fifth-generation multirole fighter aimed at combining stealth, affordability, and export potential, but as of now, it remains in development and has not yet entered operational service. Before we close, Sukhoi also made civilian aircraft. The Sukhoi Superjet 100 is a twin-engine regional passenger jet, the first modern Russian civil airliner designed with significant Western involvement. It first flew in May 19, 2008, and entered service in 2011. It seats around 87 to 100 passengers and is used by several Russian and international airlines. It's been controversial, early reliability issues, but it represents Russia's push to compete in the commercial aviation market. And that is every number in the Sukhoi Su series, from Su-1 all the way to Su-75. From a fragile high-altitude prototype in 1940 that never went to war, to a stealth drone and a brand new fifth-generation fighter in the 2020s. What a journey. The Sukhoi name went from a small Soviet design bureau to one of the most recognized names in military aviation worldwide. The Su-27 family alone changed the history of air combat forever. If you enjoyed this video, you know what to do. Like, subscribe, and leave a comment telling me which Su aircraft is your favorite. Thank you for watching. See you in the next one.